Today we're going to look at 5 books every UX writer should read. Hey guys, welcome back to UX Hero, the home of UX writing on YouTube. And I'm sat in front of the bookshelf today because I want to share with you 5 books that I think are essential reading for UX writers. Some of these books you might know, some of them you might not. We're going to start with 2 books on UX writing, then we're going to broaden that knowledge base slightly to content design, and then further expand it to design, UI and UX. I'm also going to give you a couple of honourable/dishonourable mentions. The top 5 really are designed to give you the best bang for your buck, the highest return on investment. I'm going to leave links to all these books down below. The Amazon links are affiliate links. You won't be charged anything extra, but hopefully I'll make a little bit of commission off that if you do purchase using those links, so it would really help the channel. Before we look at the top 5, I'm just going to go over those 2 honourable/dishonourable mentions. The first is Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. The second is The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. And I can hear the outrage now from some of you. So why are these classic design books not in the top 5? They're mandatory reading, right? No. Not for UX writers. Don't Make Me Think is a classic, it is a short read, and it's not a terrible book, don't get me wrong. However, it's very, very basic. So if you're new to design, you can't tell if a website is good or bad. You've no experience with a bad website design or a bad user experience, then sure, you might gain something from this book. But if you've any experience with websites and bad user experience, not even professionally, just personally, I think you can probably skip this book for now. I chose my top 5 for their usefulness. You can read these books and put what you learn into action straight away. I don't think there's a lot that you will pick up from this book that you can actually put into practice. And for me, the final nail in the coffin is that it was written in the early 2000s during the dot-com bubble. So if you think back to early 2000 websites, yeah, they were pretty bad, and there was a lot that you could do to improve them. But design has moved on a lot since the early 2000s. I mean, it's 2022 now. So the designs that are mentioned in this book, the problems mentioned in this book, a lot of these have already been eradicated. The other book that every UX designer on YouTube recommends is The Design of Everyday Things. It is a classic book for designers. However, it's very, very general. It's not specialized enough for what we need as UX writers. Really, the book can be summed up with usability should come before aesthetics. If you already knew that, you can probably skip this book for now. It's very theoretical, and like I say, it's just very general. If you're looking for a very general book, you could pick up, in fact, I've got it here, On Writing Well. This is very general. It doesn't apply to UX writing per se, but this is probably more useful for UX writers than The Design of Everyday Things. Okay, let's start with the number 1 book. This is where I think most UX writers should start, and that's Microcopy by Kinnerity Fra. In my opinion, this is the book for an introduction on UX writing. It teaches you the goals and principles of UX writing. What is UX writing? You'll learn about usability and how that affects UX writing. It even has a section on certain UX elements and how to write for each of those that then you can build on and extrapolate from. This book gives you a fantastic foundational introduction to UX writing. I read this book after becoming a UX writer, and I still think it's a fantastic book. I recommend this to everybody who is a UX writer. You could theoretically read this book and start writing UX content straight away. If you found yourself thrown into writing UX copy for a company and you need to know the basics quickly, this is the book to get. Okay, book number 2. You've got that foundational knowledge of UX writing. You know how to write for certain elements. You know the goals and principles, but you need to build that knowledge outwards because you'll be doing a lot more as a UX writer than just writing. You need to know the strategy behind that, especially if you're going to move into team leadership or management at some point. And the best book to learn the strategy is Strategic Writing for UX by Tori Podmajersky. If you're the first UX writer at your company or the first content person even, they might not have a style guide for content. They might not have an idea how to put together a voice and tone, and that might fall to you. Now, in her book, Tori puts forward the idea of a voice chart, which I absolutely love. I've used this at multiple companies to define the voice and tone, not just for UX content, but for the whole content that the company produces. It's brilliantly simple, easy to put together. Once you've got that down, you can then build the entire style guide based on that voice chart, and it's very easy to present to stakeholders. You have to remember that people outside of content and design can find it very difficult to digest and understand a style guide. So if you need buy-in, if you need somebody to sign off on your style guide, what I usually do is present them the voice chart, and in one page they can see how the style guide will be set out, the rules that I'll be following, and they can sign off, they can give feedback feedback. It's a fantastic way to present the style guide to somebody who is not a writer. If that's not reason enough to buy this book, there's also a section on your first 30, 60 and 90 days at a company, how to plan that out. There's also a section on how to ensure that your writing and your job is in line with the company goals. So it's a fantastic accompaniment to the first book, Microcopy, which focuses on how to write. This focuses on everything outside of writing itself. Okay, so let's build on this knowledge base you've got. We've looked at UX writing, we've looked at the strategy and what goes on outside of writing itself. Let's further expand into content design as a whole, and what better than the aptly named book, Content Design by Sarah Richards. Now, this is another fantastic little book. If you're new to content design or UX writing, you might not know that the UK government website, gov.uk, is regarded as one of the best examples of content design done well, and Sarah Richards worked on that site. The beauty of gov.uk is not just in how well the content itself is written, but also how it's presented on the page, the hierarchy, and also the information architecture, how each page works together and how the website as a whole works. And so a book that looks at how that was done, how that content design was put together, is essential reading for UX writers, because I guarantee you at some point you'll be working on very content heavy pages, FAQ pages. You might even be involved in the information architecture. I would have loved an even more in-depth look at the processes used for the UK government website. Sarah, if you're watching, hit me up. I'd love to do a video with you. We can nerd out about content. Okay, so let's move away from content into design. But before we dive straight into UX, let's look at UI first. I chose these 5 books to be the best investment of your time and a natural progression in terms of how you should build your knowledge. And I think diving into UX means you'll be left with a bit of a gap in terms of UI design. Now, this book I think is a real hidden gem. You don't hear many people talking about it, and I think that's a crying shame. And that's the Non-Designer's Design book by Robin Williams. Now, out of the 5 books, this is probably my favorite book. I think it's fantastic. Although it wasn't written for UX writers, it might as well have been, because it looks at content as a UI element. Once you've learned how to write and you've learned about content design, you then need to look at your content as a UI element. How does it appear on the screen? If you check out my video on runts, widows and orphans, you'll see that you need to look at your content from a UI perspective as much as a UX perspective. Now, it's not a very long book. It's split into 2 sections. The first one focuses on the principles of CRAP: contrast, repetition, alignment, proximity. And you can probably tell from those 4 words how important this is for UX writers. In this book, you'll look at how to make your content stand out, how to separate it from other content, how to do the opposite and make 2 pieces of content seem related, how to make it all look good through alignment, and how to reinforce ideas and concepts through repetition. This is all super useful stuff for a UX writer. I guarantee once you've learned the principles of CRAP, you will look at website design very differently. This is basically Don't Make Me Think, but for UX writers, and more focused, more useful. The second part of the book looks at fonts, the different types of fonts, what fonts work well together. Again, super useful stuff. Doesn't go super in depth. It's a fantastic primer and a springboard if that's something you want to focus on in future, but this will give you a great foundational look at the different types of fonts, which is very important for us as UX writers. And again, a massive gap in a lot of UX writers' knowledge base. They focus on the writing and the UX. They forget about the UI. So I think this is a fantastic little book. It's a must read. Read this before you jump into UX design. Okay, so we started with how to write. Then we looked at the strategy, content design. We then moved on to UI design, how your text functions as a UI element. I think now we can finally move on to UX design. Now, this was very difficult for me to find one book that I would recommend as your introduction to UX design. When you look at UX writing, there's a couple of books, Microcopy, Strategic Writing for UX, that serve as a fantastic introduction. We don't really have that in terms of UX design, or at least I haven't found one. They're either very specialized, so they focus on something like information architecture, or they're the opposite. They're too general and theoretical. So I came up with the book that I feel serves as the best introduction, which is UX for Beginners by Joel Marsh. However, it does come with a couple of warnings. Now, on the good side, it's very easy to read. It's broken down into 100 chapters. Each one focuses on a principle or a concept in UX design, and then you can go and apply that, or you'll be able to see it in websites. So it's very easy to work through. You can pick it up, put it down whenever you want. It's a very good book for somebody who will be working with designers, but is not necessarily a designer. Now for the 2 negatives. The first one is the humor in the book. I didn't like it. The information is good, however the tone just didn't work for me. If you can look past that, great. The second negative is the section on content, and specifically how he advises UX designers to work with writers. His advice is basically that as the designer, you can tell writers to shut up and listen to you, because as the designer, you know best. And I think this is terrible advice. It almost didn't make it onto the list for this reason. Instead of promoting cooperation, what he's basically done is foster a hostile environment between designers and writers. If I wrote a book telling UX writers to tell designers to shut up because as the writer you know best, there'd be uproar from the design community. So these are the two negatives. If you can look past them, the humor and the terrible section on content, the rest of the book is great. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit and give you a sixth book. This is technically an alternative to number 5. This is The Universal Principles of Design. If you can't get on with book number 5, UX for Beginners, this is a fantastic alternative. It's also a fantastic alternative, in my opinion, to The Design of Everyday Things. Yes, that book puts forward some foundational ideas such as affordance, but so does this book. It just does it in a more concise way. This book looks at all the design principles, lists them A to Z, it's all in alphabetical order. The only downside is it is a little bit general. There are some principles in there that don't apply to UX. So again, it's a little bit general. It's just, in my opinion, more focused than The Design of Everyday Things. So those are two options. You've got an alternative there for an introduction to UX design. If you've got a better alternative that you found, let me know. Leave it in the comments below. I just haven't found a book such as Microcopy that teaches you to go from 0 to 1, how to be a designer, that teaches you the principles, the grid system. I just haven't found that book. Maybe it's out there. Tell me in the comments below. So there you go, guys. 5-ish books every UX writer should read, starting with UX writing at the core, working our way out to UX design. Hopefully that's been useful. Let me know if there's any books you think belong in my top 5. Don't forget to tell me how wrong I am about The Design of Everyday Things, and don't make me think, and I'll catch you in the next one.